On the horizon, you spot the towering silhouette of a jagged mountain peak. The days spent exploring these isles have taken their toll on you, but you sail closer still. An island of ice comes into view, and you brace yourself for one last incursion into uncharted land, into the Pale Reach. For those who haven't watched my previous video on Dredge, I covered most of the game's lore there, but kept the Pale Reach DLC for a separate video. You technically don't need to watch that one to understand the story, as they're pretty separate, but it'll provide some context for some of the things that I'll mention. Now, without further ado, let's delve into the icy channels of the Pale Reach and uncover the horrifying tragedy that took place 100 years ago, between a captain, his crew, and an eldritch being of incomprehensible proportions. The glacial shores of the island seem barren at first, but as you sail closer, a familiar sight comes into view: the trusty traveling salesman. Upon docking, she greets you with her usual cheer, and lets you know the lay of the land. Down here to investigate the ice field too? It seems to have appeared out of nowhere. My best guess is that it drifted up from the south. Either way, I thought I should set up a pontoon here, but when I went to stake my claim, I noticed some old equipment on the ice. Come and check it out when you get a second. You can then go over and ask her what this place is, and she says, "I'm not exactly sure yet, but I have a theory. Have you heard the legend of the Pale Reach? It's an old sailor's tale. The story goes that when the fog grows thick enough, the ice appears seemingly out of nowhere. Hours later, or sometimes days, it vanishes again without a trace. Back in the olden days, they sent a survey expedition in to investigate. Apparently, it returned with half the crew, either from mutiny or madness." Travel on the high seas in those days will do that to you, I guess. Anyway, I'm not sure about this place. It could just be regular old ice. I sincerely doubt that, TM. You of all people should realize how irregular this world can be. Shortly after navigating some tight channels, you come across the photographer, who tells you that she has been on the hunt for a narwhal to add to her collection. After placing some bait, it pounces. Last time I checked, narwhal's horns weren't bioluminescent, and as you sail further into the lagoon, the glowy gold theme continues, where an ominous beacon blooms to the south. That's not the only thing of note here, however, as more dilapidated structures can be seen in the distance. Upon docking, you get to explore a cabin, and in it you find the captain's log. The book is old and drowning in dust, but the words are still legible. It reads, "Arrived at the floating sea ice amidst a particularly thick fog. A few channels could be seen leading into the ice, though sizable chunks float in our way, posing a hazard. I have ordered us to moor against the outer ice wall while the engineers make adjustments to better prepare the vessel." And while they were hard at work, something within stirred and felt their presence. We can find this creature's thoughts etched onto an obelisk for us to gaze upon. It's located on the aforementioned outer ice wall, which makes me think that their locations might be more directly connected to what they're describing than I thought. The obelisk reads, "Intruders. They invade on tiny wooden vessels, shouting and smashing. They cut and slice with angled metal, raking across a skin of ice. Their meager hearts beat with avarice and pride, desires trivially twisted into new shapes. Shapes that might mend and restore, shapes to replace what was lost, down in the dark." I find this obelisk to be way more emotional than the others we've come across. The description sounds almost hurt and offended that these foolish mortal men dare step into its domain, calling them intruders and describing the ice's skin, their cutting and slicing wounding it. We also get some foreshadowing with desires trivially twisted into new shapes, and then some contemplative lines. Shapes that might mend and restore, shapes to replace what was lost down in the dark. We shall shed some light on what these lines mean later, but know that these are the thoughts of a creature that realizes these men could be manipulated for its own gain. The next entry is a couple of days later. The vessel was pursued by a particularly aggressive narwhal. Some men placed fish on the ice nearby in an effort to distract it. It appeared to work, though only for a time. It resurfaced and needed satiating repeatedly. If we can't find a more permanent solution to the beast, we'll have to make sure we keep enough fish on hand to placate it. I get why the captain would note down how they avoided the narwhal and how to keep it at bay in the future, but this entry read so much like a tutorial to me. Maybe I just played way too many games. And lastly, the third entry. As I lay falling asleep, the most almighty voice spoke unto me. It resounded from the thick ice below, at once both powerful and ethereal. There was no mistaking this as a trick of the wind, nor a jest by the crew. It did not pause for response or acknowledgement, but whispered a cryptic prophecy. At first I could not make sense of it. 3 listeners shall hear the heart, and that I should indulge these listeners. It spoke of boundless wealth from the stars, and of eyes opening unto the world. The rest of my sleep was feverish, as my mind was plagued with the sound of the voice. It spun in my head, echoing ever louder. In the morning, the boatswain and the navigator came to me separately, claiming to have heard a sound like a heartbeat as the men were digging yesterday. They indicated a desire to explore the eastern and western reaches of the ice field. I shall indulge them. These whispers are what spurred the crew into motion, and the deep's imprint is clear as day here. Expert manipulation using otherworldly tactics, irresistible to the common soul. The journey ends inconclusively, and we're left to wonder at what came of the captain. Luckily, a conspicuous-looking ice shard lies nearby, and in its clutches is a shadow. Light pierces through the ice, intensifying and concentrating into a glow in the center. A dark form takes shape against the light. You place it near to the ice, trying to make out what the silhouette is trying to tell you. A distorted voice echoes from within.
Don't disturb the ice.
You ask the being who it was.
Captain, the expedition charged the ice field, appeared suddenly through the ice.
And of what happened here.
It whispered, promised, stones from the stars. It knew 3 would hear the heart beneath the ice.
The voice grows louder.
It commanded 3 listeners, 3 sacrifices, for 3 eyes. I obeyed, but a 4th now sees, forever, futile.
The shadow is silent for a time.
Slumbering still, should leave. It sees you, before it whispers.
There is a lot to unpack here, so we'll start with the first question that I had when reading this. What's with this ambiguity regarding the number of sacrifices? I wasn't alone in wondering this, because in the pursuits menu, you have Morgan himself being confused as well. He says, it specifically mentioned 3, or was it 4? Well, as we later find out at the end, there were a total of 4 sacrifices. But that's not what was revealed to the captain in his dreams, as he specifically heard 3 listeners shall hear the heart. Unbeknownst to him, however, there was a 4th, who turned out to be himself. What I think happened here is that the creature was just employing a bit of deception, and failed to mention that he would also be one of the sacrifices. The captain has been stuck in this pillar for a long time. If we go back to the journals, we'll see that they were written in 1847, and the game is set in around 1947. So he and his crew, who we shall shortly see suffering a similar fate, have been stuck here for 100 years, fully conscious, eternally cold, and unable to free themselves. A fate 100 times worse than death, if you ask me, which is why they all beg you to free them from their turmoil, save for the captain, who warns you not to disturb the ice, and urges you to leave before the creature spots you. This behavior stands out from the rest, and is kind of strange, because why would you want to stay stuck in this situation? Well, I have a couple of theories. First is that he's still afraid of the creature. He thinks that if he were to try escaping from his prison, it would just put him in a far worse one. Possible, but he has been stuck there for 100 years, so he must be getting desperate at this point. Second is that he's fully given in to the creature's commands, and he's basically a puppet fulfilling its wishes, and if the ice shard is destroyed, then its hope of being freed is shattered. This doesn't occur with the other crew members because they weren't under the creature's influence for as long as he has. I personally hold this one to be more plausible. The only kink is that he does warn us to leave at the end, so who knows. Last theory I got, courtesy of the ever-helpful Kirchu, is that he's lying and his eye is still on the prize. If you break the ice, then no more eyes opening onto the world or boundless wealth from the stars. It's actually quite possible because perhaps this reward is what keeps him going, and he just fully embraced the sunk cost fallacy, thinking that if he suffered this long, it might as well not be for nothing. Maybe he thinks the ritual will actually end up saving his poor soul. As always, if you have any theories of your own, feel free to write them down in the comments. The ever-enigmatic stars also get a mention from the captain, which is important because in the last video I mentioned that stars reoccurring in deep related contexts is something that doesn't really make sense, since they are a chiefly sky feature. The main way that I'd like to explain this discrepancy is by theorizing that this entity that we're dealing with here used to be of the sky, but then either turned sides to the deep or became its own faction altogether. And it's using the powers it acquired for its own goals, kind of like a soldier defecting and using the tactics it learned. I could also be just reading way too much into this and we're not meant to view the stars as something the sky owns, but that is the first logical assumption one has. Later on we shall see more mentions of stars and other things that don't fit into the neat sky/deep binary. We have heard most of what the captain has for us, and while it has left us with more questions than answers for what transpired here, we now know that the creature we're dealing with can enter minds, and that the boatswain and navigator's whereabouts are most likely in the eastern and western sides of the reach. We follow in their footsteps, first to the east, placing bait for the narwhal to break the ice barrier, and come across this imposing structure, a gigantic four-fingered claw, reaching its way from underneath the ice. It's frozen over, with no sight of its owner nearby. A lucky thing, since with a claw of this size, how large must the rest of the creature be? A makeshift dock and a pile of frozen equipment lie underneath the claw, along with an ice shard akin to the one we've just seen. If you rummage through the pile, you can find a small backpack with another journal. Captain ordered us to make camp on the ice in the center of the lagoon. After we saw those lights in the ice, everyone's got treasure on their minds. Treasure hunting isn't exactly what the expedition was commissioned for, but given the captain gets the lion's share of whatever we find, it doesn't surprise me that he's willing to bend the rules a bit. We'll start digging after the camp's done. So they were lured in with some mysterious lights. So mysterious, in fact, that when we come across the expedition's ruins, they're nowhere to be seen. And I was honestly confused as to why we couldn't spot any, as they should be visible for us too. The only light-adjacent thing that we can observe in the reach is the aforementioned golden glow seen from afar, but that's not the light that's being referred to here, since that's talked about separately later. In short, whatever the discrepancy with these lights are, they are long since gone, and only the beacon remains. In the next entry, we see how the crew fared with their incessant digging. Spend the day digging down in the ice, shovels and ice picks. Can't remember the last time I was this tired. We were only allowed 2 short breaks all day. Down in the pit, as I rested with my back against the ice, I started hearing something. It was different to the sounds of the picks. They were short and sharp. This was low, a rumble from deeper down. On my first break, it was occasional, only a few each minute. By my second break, it had quickened like a heartbeat. Before we analyze this entry, we shall have to sequence break and read a parallel one from another victim, the navigator. It reads, "The men spent the whole day digging. They passed up chunks of ice, some as brilliant as crystal, others of a deepest blue more beautiful than sapphires, but none held the glow we had seen in the night. However, I did note a disturbance in the ice to the west. It began as a periodic, distant rumble. As the men dug deeper, the pulsing quickened, strengthening until I could see the ice shifting on the surface. I shall have to inform the captain. It may well be that narwhal creature we saw earlier, though this did seem much larger. As I write this, I can already feel my eyes closing. You will have to wait until the morning." Another mention of the light, this time confirming that it is not ice, but something grander. The important bit here is the recounts of periodic rumbles and pulsing, further corroborating the heartbeat description in the previous entry. From this, you can probably figure out that heartbeat is a pretty apt descriptor, given that if you manage to have an out-of-body experience and gaze upon the dilapidated dig site from above, this appears. I was pleasantly surprised to discover this. It's really well hidden, since you're barely able to see it via normal means. I do love how it's this vile purple color, and smack dab in the center of the island, pumping dark elder blood through all of its channels. The last entry by the boatswain simply describes the captain's eagerness to find out the source of those sounds he has heard, and rigging out the location of the whispers, where they plan to set sail the following day. Unbeknownst to the boatswain, this trip will end disastrously, but at least we get to ask him all about it. The figure contorts through painful shapes.
We saw lights dancing in ice. Dug deep. Didn't know. I heard it. The heart beating under ice. The cracking, waking. The noises in the east. I went. The captain brought him here to find it. The hand in the night. Shadow of claws.
The darkness shrinks.
I turned away. Just a moment. The pain. The claws. My back. So cold. So dark. Under ice. Please. Break the ice.
More delicious lore fragments from this monologue, though I must once again highlight how terrible of a fate this is. The guy just wants to be put out of his misery. Anyways, he recounts the noises breaking out when the heart was awakened. I guess them digging the heart out caused the blood to flow to the claw, or something to that effect. We also get more clues that the captain may have had a hand in handing the navigator a handful of claws, in his back, that is. Right now it's a bit vague, however. Perhaps the creature's claws came crashing onto the boatswain. In any case, no matter the method, he was sacrificed, and his soul trapped, begging for salvation. He, unlike the captain, pleads for the ice to be broken. We must first find an ice pick to fulfill his wishes, but before we go looking for that, we need to do some more investigating to the west. What's another few hours to 100 years of waiting? In the western side, we find a similar situation at hand. A makeshift camp contains our journal. We have already perused the first entry earlier, and the second merely describes the captain's cover-up of the boatswain's demise. So that leaves the third. It reads, "We are alone on a small island of ice. After hours of rowing through narrow channels, it rose through the fog. A gargantuan, monstrous claw, reaching from the deep. Whatever creature it once belonged to must be long dead, as the claw is frozen solid. I wanted to turn back immediately, but the captain insisted we investigate. He's on edge, his head turning this way and that, listening for the slightest sound. He's convinced something will happen after dark. As the last light from the cold sun fades, I have the sense that it will be a long night. And a cold one at that. So these claws that we've come across haven't always been here, but have just resurfaced, answering the knock made by the curious crew. The captain is also slowly losing his senses, turning mad by the narwhal's whispers, itching to fulfill its quest." I won't be reading all of the navigator's dialogue because much of it is redundant, except this bit here where he says, "This cold sun, warmth long forgotten." I like this line because it further confirms that they're conscious in there, and feeling, suffering through every second of those 100 years. As of now, we have communed with 3 spirits, barely clinging onto life, nay, being forced to endure it. One of these 3, the captain, was possessed by the whispers of an incomprehensible beast that lies somewhere in this ice field. It compelled him to murder his people in cold blood, to aid in a ritual that he can't begin to comprehend, so that it may reunite and rise once again. But 3 sacrifices were not enough, and the 4th now sees, forever, futile. This is the last character we meet on our journey, ironically named the First Officer. And next to him, crowned with that grand golden horn, is the frozen head of the Narwhal. The First Officer has much to say, calling the captain a murderer and a betrayer, begging us to break the ice and being regretful that he couldn't save the crew. After the captain led the boatswain and the navigator to their doom, he turned his eyes onto him, dragging him to follow the lights they saw near the southern cliffs. The great horn then came into view, and the captain further descended into his madness, whispering and communing with the monster, crying out that it chose him. He finally strikes the officer, subsequently trapping his soul in the ice. The officer can then be asked about the thing in the ice, where he says,
I know not. The eyes open, watching, shadow of shadow, through the ice, yet more, closed still. It cannot arise, break the ice, cull the heart, must not fully awaken. The eyes, close them, strike the heart.
So the narwhal must not fully awaken. Got that. But after exhausting all the dialogue and journals, it seems like we're not that much closer to really understanding this creature. We still don't know how it came here, what it wants, and why it's all frozen. Well, I see only one way to remedy that, by analyzing the ever-living shit out of it. There are a total of 2 obelisks on the Pale Reach. We've already examined one, and while that gave us some insight into the monster's thoughts and plans, this one sheds some light on its origin. It reads, Darkness, the deep. Then sparks of light as tooth and spine meet horn and nail. 2 primeval forces clashing at the bottom of the world. After an age, a victor triumphs, sundering the other into impossibly large remnants that ascend to the surface, slowly to be claimed by the sky. But the broken body holds power still. Threads of crimson essence reach out through the water, stretching to unite the creature once more. As the remains break the surface, ice begins to form. So the Reach is the result of an age-old battle that took place between 2 primeval forces. So from the obelisk, we can gather that the creature tried to reunite using threads of crimson essence, possibly power from the deep, but then ice started to form and the process was halted. And this is where things become their familiar flavor of confusing. Now, it's clear that the crimson threads are of the deep. That color is basically synonymous with it. So we can be sure that it either tried to keep the narwhal alive, or it was the creature's own power manifesting. That's all clear. What's weird is that ice formed. Why did that happen? And can we be sure that it halted the process in the first place? Maybe it was actually preserving it. We'll tackle the why first, because as we already know from the Iron Rig, the elder blood coursing through aberrated and deep creatures is freezing, and causes the air and water around it to be cool. We actually see this very prominently in one cool example when the fanatic self-immolates. The freezing blaze climbs his legs, his chanting continues, no pain detectable in his voice. He lifts his arms skyward. Seconds later, the inferno engulfs him. It rages for a moment, then abruptly dies away. A cold mist pools around the floor of the temple briefly, before the wind sweeps it into the sea. No trace of the fanatic remains. The pyre is cold and damp. You take the pocket watch. It's freezing cold. It vibrates in your palm, clock hand spinning wildly below the cracked face. So we have yet another prominent feature of the deep, the cold. Cold blaze, cold flames, cold pyre, and a freezing cold clock. A space-shifting ice island is the next logical step. Back to our narwhal's severance. It's pretty easy to conclude now that since its entire body was destroyed, the amount of elder blood within it caused the ice sheets to form, and locked it in place, which is where the conflict of interest emerges. While the crimson threads were there to reunite the creature, the sheer amount of its blood caused the water around it to freeze. You see where I'm getting at? It seems at first as if the sky is the one that's stopping the narwhal from joining back together, but in fact it's just the properties of its blood that made it shoot itself in the paw, which is very strange. One would expect the reason for the narwhal staying broken would be an effort conducted by the party that tried to kill it, but it's in fact just something inadvertent that happened to it, and the Leviathan was therefore just lucky it couldn't reunite. Or perhaps it's just smart and knew this would occur. In any case, let me know what you think down in the comments. Back to the obelisk, specifically the beginning section with the mention of darkness. It reminded me a lot of the Age of Dark in Dark Souls, where it's just stagnant and sterile, nothing of note happening till something sends a spark. In this case, the Leviathan battling with the Narwhal, the dark depths of the ocean, reflecting the darkness of the beginning of time. We now know how the Narwhal came to be in this situation, but according to everything we've gone through, it should be whole by now, no? It successfully managed to procure 4 fresh souls for its epic comeback. However, it's still as broken as ever, so either the ritual failed or something else is up. Luckily for us, the first officer gives us a hint as to what that might be, when he says that the eyes must not fully awaken. When we arrive at the scene, we see 4 eyes open on one side, however the other is covered with ice. I think these are the eyes that are supposed to open again for a proper revival to occur, but we're just unable to see if they're open or not. In any case, this line shows that the ritual isn't complete, meaning that the 4 sacrifices the Narwhal managed to acquire weren't enough for it to stitch itself back together. That, or it needs many more eons to finish the process. Say it got the materials and now needs the time to rebuild, or it's just taken an impossibly long power nap. In any case, I think any of these is a satisfying reason why the Narwhal isn't up and swimming by the time we find it. Before we leave, we make sure that there is no chance for it to spring back to life, by finally putting the poor boatswain, navigator, first officer, and, against his own wishes, the captain, to rest. Dredging up 4 ice picks and using them to shatter the ice shards, freeing them from their turmoil. One by one, the Narwhal's eyes close, till it is broken for good. In the water surrounding its decaying corpse, a much smaller visage roams around, hunting for food. This baby Narwhal is yet another puzzling piece in the story. Its mere existence confuses me because why is there a monster in the Pale Reach that's just a miniature version of the colossal mythical creature that can telepathically speak to people and manipulate them? Like, is it its child or something? Is there a whole race of these Narwhals? Will this tiny Narwhal grow up to follow in Daddy's footsteps? So many questions. But first we have to do a side-by-side comparison to see how alike/different they really are. Starting with the similarities, they both have that iconic golden horn, though on baby Narwhal it's noticeably longer. They both have a similar set of teeth, same nose, same number of eyes on each side, and a similar head shape, with these triangular tufts of fur sticking out. They also both have the same claws, both with similar looking 5 digits. Now for the differences. The first noticeable one is that the Narwhal's face has this brown area, where its eyes are located. Its lips, for a lack of a better word, are also that color, though it seems like it's a similar situation for baby Narwhal. My theory for this stark difference is that this is like a sign of maturity for this species, if indeed they are by any way related. Another idea is that the Narwhal is special, and therefore has this characteristic, like a brand marking it as their god. I also don't think that its absence in baby Narwhal is a limitation of the low poly style, like the eyes being different, so we can probably rule that out. So what's the verdict? What's baby Narwhal's deal? Back in the journals, we're told that it was gunning for the ship, which risks killing them prematurely and therefore interferes with the ritual, so it's effectively going against the Narwhal's motives. This is actually a recurring theme in Dredge, where the monsters are interfering with the bigger plan that their creator/ruler set, whether it's mind-suckers summoning vines that attempt to crash our ship, or the unseeing mother biting it. If Morgan were to die at sea, then there would be no ritual, and therefore the Elder wouldn't rise. A conflict of interest. A simple explanation would be that all of these creatures that I just mentioned still maintain complete autonomy, and have only been created by the deep. If we assume that they're animals that run on animal instincts, then baby Narwhal trying to capitalize on a surprise lunch makes perfect sense. It's not serving the sky or the deep, it's serving itself, a meal. This implies that neither the sky nor the deep are strong enough to have direct control on the creatures they spawned, and only have select ambassadors whom they can completely influence, which is fine. It directly supports how this world works. You have the higher powers, their agents, and the slight ways in which the sky and the deep can manipulate the world, each side's power waxing and waning depending on the current cycle. Which brings me to an important question regarding the big Narwhal. Is it of the sky or of the deep? At first it might seem obvious. It's evil, supposedly fought with a Leviathan, ergo it's an agent of the deep. But things aren't always this cut and dry. After you break the ice and free the crew's trapped souls, you get a frozen heart from each of them. Its description reads: a brilliant crystal of pure ice, gossamer filaments of radiant light drift from within. Radiant light. Now, where have we heard that before? It certainly sounds like a sky motif, and indeed, we see it in the name of the radiant squid, which for those who have watched the previous video will know that it's not a deep aberration, but has most likely been corrupted by the sky. Moreover, when we break the ice, we get this description of the stone. A glistening stone lies cradled by broken shapes, wispy threads of starlight trailing from it. So we can safely assume that these stones/frozen hearts contain the power of the stars. This will be important later. If you explore around the Pale Reach, you'll find this conspicuous looking pedestal that's encased in ice. Upon interacting, you're prompted with this. A translucent spire of ice stretches down into the darkness. A pulsing glow rises from the deep, illuminating 4 round sockets. After you place each of the frozen hearts into the sockets, it says, the glowing light intensifies, feeding into the 4 stones. A web of light grows between them, connecting, rejoining, uniting, and delivering the radiant trawl net. We shall discuss this item in a moment, but first some details regarding this whole ritual. That pulsing glow that's mentioned is crimson in color, and the rock slab itself seems to be made of basalt. These are the same characteristics that we have in the obelisks, and the other stone pedestals scattered around the Grey Isles, putting it on par with a deep creation. Which is why this is so intriguing, because there are a lot of other signs pointing towards it being a sky one. In addition, if you examine the pedestal's UI, you can see this illustration in the middle, which appears to be a heart of stone. If you put the purple heart in the ice and compare it side by side, they look very similar. They might look that way because they're both just hearts, but we'll gloss over that for a second. So it's almost like the tiny frozen hearts formed the big one, or the big one spawned the tiny frozen hearts. In any case, there's a theme of unification, which is what I'm really trying to get at. So, to recap, throughout your journey, you collect these fragmented pieces of an ancient creature, dubbed the Frozen Hearts, and by shattering the ice pillars that contain them, you make sure that the beast can never reunite. However, when you meld these fragments together, instead of spelling doom, it provides you with something beneficial, and a boon. One could even say it yields its user with boundless wealth from the stars, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. What are we supposed to make of this radiant trawl net in the first place? Its description reads: strands blend through hues of the aurora, a gleaming trap of light in the dark, menacing spikes of ice adorn a basalt frame. It's such a perfect blend of sky and deep, the skylights of the aurora against the deep basalt frame. However, according to Joel, the developer of the game, it is not equipment of the deep. I mean, the text itself tells us this. It's not crimson, ergo not an aberration. He also goes to mention that there are other corrupting forces in this world, read sky. This object could be interpreted in a couple of ways, but the main one that I envision is that this is a sky victory. The lights of the aurora have basically overpowered the basalt that is so characteristically of the deep, and therefore nullified its power. However, you could argue that since the light is being trapped, it's the other way around. We already have our answer, but I like this almost yin and yang symbolism we have here. So the radiant trawl is a sky object. What's the big deal? Well, if the Narwhal's influence is what caused these frozen hearts to emerge, and combining them revealed an object from the sky, what does this tell us of the Narwhal itself? Is it actually not fighting for the deep? Perhaps it even went rogue. Let's entertain this possibility first, and say it's fighting on behalf of a different party altogether, say the stars. A comment on the previous video by a Razorblade4522 provided a really interesting point regarding this, and I'll just read it out in full. I think that the stars are a sort of neutral or unallied party that both the deep and the sky want to wipe out for different reasons. The deep could see them as the only thing stopping the total blackness of the sky above, which would make overtaking the sky even easier when it is at its strongest, while the sky could see them as incomplete or wavering in capacity, and the sky would rather them create a light bright enough to make up for the darkness that falls when the sun sets. I really like this theory because it fits with a lot of the stuff that we've seen. One of the hooded figures, coincidentally the one we find on the Pale Reach, directly states the stars leave the sky, fall to the deep, so it wishes to destroy them, And if you remembered, the frozen hearts we collect contain starlight within them, possibly power that was conducted by the Narwhal. I guess bountiful wealth from the stars could be more literal than we had imagined. So that's theory number 1. The Narwhal isn't sky or deep, but of the stars. I like this because it would mean that this story shows us that this dichotomy we have between the sky and the deep isn't one at all, and there are other parties fighting for power in this eon-spanning war. Now for theory number 2, which is admittedly more likely to be true, and that the Narwhal was originally a sky creature through and through, but then switched, either of its own accord or it was consumed by the deep. It would explain why it speaks of stars and gifts from the sky, spawns sky stones and radiant trawl nets, along with this detail that may or may not be relevant. At the end of the good ending, right before you get gobbled up, you can see a yellow glow mixed in with rays of crimson and green. If you squint your eyes sideways, it kind of resembles the glow of the Narwhal's golden horn, so there's perhaps a connection here. All of these sky traits end up clashing with the deep ones, like its bright purple eyes, which are almost a one-to-one match of these little buggers. One other cool thing that might be an indicator of this transformation is the giant purple heart. Perhaps it wasn't always purple, and once it succumbed to the deep, elder blood started pumping throughout its body, giving it this mauve, ghoulish hue. Finally, when the horn breaks off after you quell the monster, you can dredge it up, revealing itself to be the oar's anchor. Its description reads, "A fragment of a golden splintered horn. Discordant buzzing fills the surrounding air. It yearns for the deep." This item creates a portal directly to Blackstone Isle, where we know the deep is at its highest concentration. It appears that every part of this creature's body is attuned to the deep. Why I find this theory more appealing is because instead of the big Narwhal being an agent of the deep from the get-go, it shows how even a gargantuan creature like it can be consumed and swayed. It also helps that it explains the sky motifs going around. It's like if a soldier was fighting for one side, then defected and started using the old strategies and tactics that he knows. Except in this case, the soldier is an eldritch entity, and the tactics are unfathomable starlit bounties from the sky. And with that, we're finally finished with analyzing the big Narwhal. I wasn't kidding when I said I was going to analyze him from top to bottom. In the end, I find this creature to be teetering on the edge of being kind of bland. While the implications of what it's capable of are strong, we only catch a glimpse of them, and when we're finally done with our quest, it's simply up and withers. It's kind of pathetic if you ask me. I guess it was in its final throes of shattering, and had expended all of its energy collecting those 4 sacrifices. But still, everything that it did was implicit, and I kind of expected more. I won't say it was disappointing per se, because I enjoyed its sight, the descriptions, and how its victims suffered, but I can't help but feel like something is missing. We are in the final stretch of the video now, with only some odd bits and ends left to discuss. The Pale Reach didn't just introduce a new eldritch entity, but also some cool new fish for us to pore over. We have a lot of star-related fish, very on theme. First, the Astrolice fish, which has such a cool design, regardless of any lore implications. You also have that joining together theme, with the description, "Constellations of light dance through its body, stitching fin to flesh and spine to bone." I'm sure this is specific for this fish only, but who's to say it's not reflected in the grander Narwhal? Perhaps even supporting the theory that it's of the sky, and these are similar constellations of light that wish to join its body after its severing. Okay, I'm definitely reading too much into it now. However, one theme that I'm sure is intended is the parallel between the sea stars and the fallen stars, where the latter has been deformed, twisted, and taken into the deep's domain, a conquest of the sky's stars. Such a star could also be in the eye socket of an aberrated stargazer, its 2 eyes joined into a bright spinning one. Finally, we have the feral lizardfish, which I included purely because it just hurt my brain that this fish looked so similar to the deep form, and the possibility of there being a connection between the two. Alas, I think that it's merely a case of them being antithetical to each other. While the deep form is trying to dive into the deep and yield itself to it, the feral lizardfish is preparing for an ascent, to rise, and possibly invade the world beyond. We cannot speak of its intentions, but given that it's twisted by the deep, it's better to err on the side of caution. In any case, I admire how much creepiness the artist managed to shove into this one image. How this innocent lizardfish was deformed to grow limbs where it shouldn't. Primitive ones, yes, but the bipedal form that emerges is nevertheless recognizable as something appallingly unnatural. The Terror. This was what I initially thought the Narwhal was called, because I saw it in this line. That was uttered by the boatswain, though in hindsight that doesn't make much sense, since they most likely didn't even have enough time to think up a name for it. Unless he could have thought it up while he was in the ice shard. Anywho, the Terror in fact is not the name of the beast, but the name of the boat, or rather ship, that the crew came in. I was then enlightened and told that it's also based on a real ship, the HMS Terror. I had a fun time reading the wiki page for it, as I didn't expect some of the absurd things that happened. Like Dredge's Terror, the HMS Terror has also gone on an Antarctic expedition, 3 times in fact. It was previously a bomb ship, and its sturdiness made it quite suitable for braving the ice-laden waters. The first expedition didn't go so well, and it nearly sank. The second though was a success, exploring a lot of uncharted waters and discovering many new flora and fauna, along with naming a mountain Mount Terror, as if naming a ship that wasn't enough. The really interesting bits though begin in the third expedition, where only 2 months after setting sail, the ship disappeared. A massive search effort was conducted, but the wreckage was nowhere to be found. A particularly chilling detail is that some Inuits reported that some of the crew members resorted to cannibalism, which was supported by cut marks on the skeletal remains, as well as pot polish, which is when cut bone ends become smooth from being thrown in a vessel during cooking. After massive search efforts spanning many years, the wreckage was finally found in 2016, a whole 171 years later. I love this story because it's so damn tragic. Like, they just wanted to explore some Antarctic wasteland, which is admittedly very dangerous, but ended up dying of exposure and cannibalizing each other. The wreck not being found until 2016 was also a nice touch. What does this have to do with the Terror in our story though? Well, not a lot, I just thought the real Terror was cool. But I do like when fictional stuff takes from real life, because it's very entertaining to imagine an alternate universe where things happen differently. And that basis of reality gives it some credibility, I guess, like it's more grounded. This is also why I like ARGs so much. They make the world of fiction bleed into our own in a seamless way. We've discussed the fish, the ship, and now only the journals are left. But haven't we already covered them in detail before? Well, while we went over the contents, we missed the images themselves. If you look really hard, you can decipher some legible text. It's not the same as the one in the journals themselves, and some of it doesn't make sense and or is really hard to decipher. As much as I wanted to uncover what secrets it held, I wanted to first make sure that they were there to begin with, and alas, they weren't. Joel confirmed that if there is any legible text there, it's not direct canon and should be disregarded. Oh well. And with that, we have reached the end of our journey. For real this time. I'm positive that I've covered everything there is to talk about regarding Dredge's lore, and to be honest, it was a blast collecting every interesting tidbit about this game, and analyzing it. This DLC, though short and sort of controversial for fans of the game, is still very much enjoyable. I spent way more time on it than I planned, and I didn't grow tired of it. The dying monster trying to return to its former splendor, along with the tortured souls of the mere mortals that stepped into its boundaries, was a really cool and inspiring image. This is where I wish that the story was more fleshed out. It's a premise with potential, and if the developer team had the resources and time, it could have been something much grander. As for a moral for our story, well, I think it's pretty clear-cut from here. Greed and avarice are filthy traits, and you just don't know if one of these days you'll be punished for it by rotting for 100 years in a pillar of ice, tricked by a mind-reading eldritch narwhal. There are other themes, of course, like the ever-present stars, human selfishness, and separation then unification. There's also some karma sprinkled here and there. The captain did get what was coming to him. Oh, and also, if you hear a prophecy in your dreams, maybe don't act on it. This story would have gone much more differently had the captain ignored the whispers and led his expedition straight back home. Though perhaps his will and mind never stood a chance against the creature's coercion, and they were doomed from the start. Before I sign off, I'd like to thank the people who helped with the making of this video. Those being Joel the developer, Kershu, Ultimate Ragnarok, and the members of the Dredge wiki server, alongside Bluey, who provided the commands and mods that helped me get behind the scenes of the game and investigate freely. Anyways, thank you very much for watching the video, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.